My guest on the show today is Slater Victoroff. Slater is the founder and CTO of Indico, an enterprise AI solution for unstructured content that emphasizes document understanding. And Slater and I don't know each other, and we are starting to get to know each other, and we got a lot more fun things to talk about. I've always been like, wow, this is going to be a good interview. So Slater, welcome. Good morning. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. I'm doing great. You know, it's a sunny morning here in Somerville, so I can't really be happy.
Somerville is in Massachusetts.
Yes, yeah, right outside of Boston. It's the the crunchy Seattle right outside of Boston.
That's amazing. The crunchy Seattle version of Boston. That's so good. I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah, it was like every college city needs one. Right?
Yeah.
So it's like Brooklyn.
Yeah, right. I'm from Brooklyn, so that I totally get it.
Oh, there you go.
I totally get it.
My aunt's in Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is very cool. Well, we're going to get right into this because based on our conversation so far that we had off the air, we got a lot to talk about. So Slater, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's do it. So Slater, what's something that you nerd out about?
I absolutely love mushrooms.
Such a good answer.
And just kind of like this absolutely unavowed. I just love them so much. So this is something that I didn't really get into for a long time. Actually, when I was a kid, all the way through. Actually, I remember the moment I liked a mushroom that I ate for the first time ever. It was the San Francisco airport, and I had an enoki mushroom, right? Those like long, spindly white ones. And I was like, wow, this is great. This is delicious. I guess I do like mushrooms. But even until that point, I was like 17 or whatever, I thought I didn't like mushrooms my whole life. And then I was out rock climbing with my buddies up in Rumney, up in New Hampshire, and I knew like a very little bit about mushrooms, but it was just this fantastic rainy July sort of this past winter. So it was, September or something. And these massive, massive mushrooms we saw just growing out of the base of this tree. And, we found 10 pounds probably of hen of the woods mushrooms.
And mushrooms are really light, so that's a lot of mushrooms, isn't it?
It's yeah. I mean, it's like, it was like this Trader Joe's bag just filled with these massive
That's
mushrooms. Cool. It wasn't even all of them. We couldn't even get all of them. And for comparison, for folks that don't know, right? Because I kind of looked up, it's like, okay, like how expensive is this? Like how tasty is it? Like the thing you've got to have in your mind, like imagine walking through the forest and you find like a Wagyu steak, like a top cut Wagyu steak just sitting on the ground. That's basically what it is in terms of, cost per weight and just like how delicious this is. I mean, this is stuff that we literally can't grow this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like it has to be out in the wild. Like people have to go find it that day. And from just a biological perspective, everyone should watch the movie Fantastic Fungi. It's on Netflix.
Fantastic Fungi.
It's so amazing. Yeah.
You do nerd out about this stuff. This is perfect. I love it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Fungi are like the first, they're like this weird juncture between single-celled and multi-celled organisms. Yeah. They sort of colonized the land so land plants could take over the land. So, before there were trees, there were mushrooms, and they grew in this prehistoric, these massive, like 2-story tall mushrooms that sort of churned up the very rocky soil of early Earth to make it habitable for life, which is just crazy and amazing. Like, I always, and the thing that's also really interesting, especially if you live in the U.S., is we're terrified of mushrooms
because we're taught as kids that like you don't eat them because they could be poisonous.
Totally, right. And there's actually a term for that, which is mycophobia. And at first, I'm like, oh well, I mean, that's just how mushrooms are, right? They're super dangerous. You could eat a poisonous mushroom at any moment. It turns out that that's basically nonsense. Poisonous mushrooms do exist, right? Like I want to be clear about that, but they're extremely rare. And the number of mushrooms that are both poisonous and will kill you and are tasty and like you wouldn't even just spit them out after having like a single taste, it's really rare. It's really only a handful in the whole world of mushrooms. And by the way, if you compare it to berries and leaves, right? Just like the stuff that we eat normally, it's actually way less dangerous, like on a percentage basis, which is like, and then when that sinks in, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Like there's poisonous berries everywhere, but I don't have that same reaction to like picking a berry and eating it, or like picking a mushroom.
Yeah. You had me, I saw, how U-Haul, they always have like a state fact. You have like U-Haul trucks.
Oh no.
Well, if you look at a U-Haul, like a U-Haul truck you go and rent at a local U-Haul, they always have like state of Massachusetts and like some sort of fact. I saw one.
Oh, cool.
I saw one and I believe it was Michigan, and it was something about like the world's largest mushroom, and it like lived and it's underground, and it's like it's massive. It's like acres or something.
I think that's in it's in the Pacific Northwest.
Maybe it is maybe it's Montana or something. But I've seen this and I was like, wow, that's fascinating.
It's either Seattle or Portland.
Got it.
But it's a honey mushroom. It's a honey fungus, and it's 3.5 miles.
That's what it is. That's insane.
It's absolutely, the thing that's even crazier is like you have to think like mushrooms are basically aliens. That's my current theory. They're aliens. They're just like not comparable to anything else. Because when we're talking about it, it's not like a tree. It's not like there's a tree growing there, right? It's this mycelial network, which are these hyphae, which are just like these little threads that grow from spores. And they sort of, in this weird, pseudo-democratic, very organic way, they like split and join and grow. And they almost have this, they kind of facilitate this stock market of nutrients. I mean, there's different types, but many of them will like facilitate this almost stock market of nutrient exchange between the trees and the forest. Like, oh, hey, this aspen is really great at, getting, lithium or whatever I need. Or, it can make some lipids. I'm going to trade it, this thing, and it'll actually facilitate sort of trading even between trees.
Wow.
Which,
that's mind blowing.
I don't know. It's crazy. It's mind blowing. And then the way they create mushrooms, I don't know. I could go on and on about this.
People are tuning in. They're like, so is this like a cooking show or what are we talking? No, it's so fascinating.
I'll maybe leave one
Please.
Just like last fact to highlight just how alien mushrooms are. So like oyster mushrooms, like the things that you find in the grocery stores. So in humans, right, and like most mammals, there's two mating types, I'll say, right? Like a rough like male and female that make offspring. In mushrooms, in oyster mushrooms, actually different by species, first of all, but in oyster mushrooms, there are over 20,000 different mating types.
What?
Just completely not like male-female analogous. Most of them are capable of creating offspring with one another, but not all of them.
Weird.
It's and even the process of sort of like mating or whatever and creating a new mushroom is this weird like local voting strategy where everyone's like, you're like voting for the king,
they're stack ranking. They're stack ranking the mushrooms. They're
like these are the best ones, right? So these are going to form the blueprint for the mushroom, and then almost like answer something, the other nearby hyphae will actually be like sacrifice themselves to become the pieces of this mushroom for someone else's genetics. It's
I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you right now, Slater. One of the things I love about hosting this podcast is I literally have no idea what I'm going to learn about it. I just learned a lot about a topic that before I'm like, yeah, mushrooms. I like them. I like them cooked on burgers. I like beef stroganoff, and they're good in salad. And now I'm like, wait, I know. I feel like I got a crash course on mushrooms. So thank you, and I'm sure everybody else listening does as well.
I'll say, especially up in the Catskills, any forest, like go after a rain, just see what you see.
Yeah.
And like if you see something big and pretty, just Google it. Don't go like eating strange mushrooms. Definitely don't do that.
I'll be like, Slater, you told me I'm in the hospital, dude. Like, you told me to eat these things.
Yeah, disclaimer. Like, I am not a medical professional. This is a terrible idea. Ask some mushroom person. But you'll be surprised. Like if you see something really big and distinctive, those tend to be pretty easy to identify.
I'm tempted to continue this, but I think we got some other stuff to talk about.
Yeah, we got other stuff for sure.
Slater, what's something that is inside of your comfort zone, easy for you, you love doing, that is going to be outside of somebody else's?
Ooh, fighting. I think that's something I would definitely pick as one. I had a very, very small MMA career, right? But I did martial arts sort of all from, the young age until, I kind of stopped after college, when things got kind of really intense. But it was actually really interesting. Actually, me and my wife, she's a 3rd-degree black belt in Taekwondo. And, we've kind of both just been doing martial arts for, over a decade, most of our lives when we met. And something that we found was really interesting is that for us, fighting someone, sparring, being like, hey, like, let's jump in the ring and like, bat each other around. That's a very friendly kind of get to know you sort of thing. Right?
For you, yes. For you.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? I learned very early on when you make the same suggestion to someone at a tech company, they don't look at you quite the same way. they're really afraid of getting hit in the head.
Well, not only that, but I'm like, I think of UFC. I'm not I know it. I'm not a huge fan, but I'm like, the stories where he's like, this dude blew out his knee, or he's fighting with a broken elbow, or his face looks like it went through a masher. I'm like, that is not in my comfort zone. I don't need to subject myself to that.
That's super. Yeah. And I mean, like the UFC definitely, they kind of play up that.
Those people are crazy.
Quite a lot. They are, but let me challenge that a little bit, right? Because I also think that when you hear someone blew out a knee, right, very different from hearing like, oh, someone tore his meniscus playing golf,
yeah,
which also
true,
happens,
yeah,
right. And it's not that there's not a potential for injury, right? Like there absolutely is, and very very rarely people can get killed, but it's not even the most dangerous sport,
right?
And I think that the other thing that people don't realize is like the kinds of mitts and equipment they're using in that UFC fight, like that's crazy. Like that's when you're sparring with someone, like you got these big heavy mitts, like you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
Right. Like very, very safe if you know what you're doing.
Yep. This is a good example of something that is inside your comfort zone that is outside of mine. I would not hop in the ring with you to get to know you any further. I'd rather talk mushroom. So
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
We'll go foraging.
We'll go foraging together. And I will be sure not to piss you off either. So Slater, take a look at the inverse of that question. So what's something that you're uncomfortable with that's outside of your comfort zone that is going to be inside of somebody else's?
All right, so here's maybe a strange fact for me. This will be like a small public health announcement. So I actually have a strange is maybe not the right word, an uncommon neurological condition. It's called misophonia. And have you ever heard of synesthesia?
Yeah, it's the ability to hear, to see music as colors, right? Similar,
approximately.
Yeah.
Right? So synesthesia is where you have any sense that sort of crosses.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right? So actually, in a totally unrelated sense, I do have synesthesia, but for me, sense actually map to touch for me. Right. So you like smell a lemon, to me, right? That feels like chrome, like something very smooth and shiny.
Yeah.
And it's just like natural, like I sense it. Now, misophonia, it's a very similar kind of thing, but more destructive. And the way it's often described is sort of like a sound emotion synesthesia. And so there are basically particular, sort of the sound of smacking lips is like very, very common, where for a lot of folks, like, maybe that's annoying. For folks with misophonia, it actually will trigger a fight or flight response.
I know this. I live with this. Not me. My wife has this for gum chewing.
That's crazy. There you go. It's absolutely a real thing.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah.
It honestly, if I don't know if she knew the term misophonia or not, but it's, I literally thought I was crazy until I Googled it and found like, no, this is a real, it's just like a miswiring in the brain.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, she didn't know about it, but I think the New York Times did an article on it or something a few years ago.
Oh,
and
really?
So for her,
there you go.
I don't have anything like this, but for her, it's like, gum chopping, lip smacking, and, like crunching. Like people that are eating like potato chips with their mouth open, she actually like can't be around it. And I used to make fun of her.
Yeah.
And now I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is the thing, right? It is really hard because it's so weird. And honestly, like being on either side of it, it's so bizarre. And it's really tragic because it's what my wife has as well. I don't have it as severe as some people do. It's actually really tragic, though. You hear some of the case studies because when it's a kind of a new and weird thing,
right? Yeah.
And so the case studies are pretty extreme. But the case studies, they're these 16 and 17-year-old kids that like punched their brother or punched their mother or something, right? And they don't understand why they did it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, they were forced in that situation. They're getting angrier and angrier. They're like, what's happening? Am I going crazy? Right? It's like that chomping, chewing, like right next to them. Parents don't understand what's happening. They like lash out in some violent way. And they're like, and then, the second it stops, they're like, oh my God, like, what did I just do? That was horrible. And so, thankfully, it's kind of, being understood better. You're seeing like a lot less of that. But, thankfully I don't have it that bad.
Do you know do you know the Twinkie defense from the Harvey?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So for everybody listening, Twinkie defense is, and help me here, Slater. But so Harvey Milk, who was assassinated in and Sean Penn won an Oscar for playing him. He was killed by, I forget the person's name, but they actually used the Twinkie defense because he was using too many Twinkies. I'm bringing this up because I'm curious if this has ever been used as any sort of like thing in a court of law of, well, I have got this thing and I actually lose. Because his lawyer, I believe his lawyer's assertion was that he was out of his mind because he had, they call it, yeah. So I'm curious have you ever heard of this as a defense?
So it's interesting. So, I do know, maybe I'll give like a hair more color on the Twinkie defense, because it's exactly right. It was the assassin of Milk. Which,
and the mayor of San Francisco, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a big deal, right? And there are intricacies to the legal defense, but a big part of it was just he had eaten so many Twinkies, they were so full of processed stuff that he was in an altered mental state. And a really important part of the defense also was that he didn't realize he was in an altered mental state because, like, who knows what's in a Twinkie, that sort of thing. And it was, there's nuances that I actually think made that defense weirdly successful in the way that it was applied. But I also think we're probably not quite doing it justice. It's worth like Googling if folks really want to know the details. So the only case I know here, one of the things that's interesting and sort of tragic is that, as far as I know, no like person who suffers from misophonia has ever like attacked someone and then been like brought to a court or anything like that. And the main reason is that they usually know well enough, they're much more likely to just like walk out of a room instead of hit someone, right? Yeah. And in those really rare cases where that does happen, like it's a really close family member that can see that something is going on. So it's not the kind of thing that's going to result in charges. I have actually seen the reverse though. This is something I actually didn't really key in on until I started like watching a lot of TV. Some people eat as actually a really kind of intentionally aggressive thing. And you see this on TV sometimes, right? Folks will like, kind of take it and like, really start like smacking loudly as sort of a power thing. Yeah. And so there was this case where someone was doing that in a movie theater, right? Just like eating popcorn really loudly, super obnoxiously. Someone with misophonia said, "Hey, could you stop? Like, this is a little excessive." And the guy shot them.
Oh my God.
Like literally, right. Yeah. So that's, it's a little dark, but that's the only case.
But there is a record out there of something happening in this, and
yeah, there is.
Man, Slater, I'm getting a quick education. You got a lot to teach. I'm learning a lot.
Professor Slater. Yeah.
Professor Slater. We're going to talk mushrooms. We're going to talk lip smacking. All right. So now, kind of as we move into the next question for you here, Slater, is if I was to give you 5 minutes and you were able to give kind of like your 5-minute TED Talk, and all of us out here get to hear it, so the entire world, what is it that you would speak on, and what would be your call to action to us out here in the audience? What would you want us to do with the information you're sharing with us?
Okay. All right. So I'll say with that, I'll actually probably change my answer. And I think that what I want to talk on is education specifically for maybe folks that aren't neurotypical and folks that are maybe non-neurotypical and gifted. And this is kind of a trifecta of things that I personally fit in.
Later, could you for all of us, could you, for those listening who maybe don't know exactly what that means, I think I do, but could you just define what those terms actually mean in a scientific way?
Yeah, absolutely. So the term sort of neurotypical and neurodivergent first came around in talking about autism and sort of the autism spectrum, where they started really asking these tricky questions about where does the line of autism start, right? Where does the line of just being a quirky person end? And they sort of came across with this answer of it doesn't really.
Yeah, right. It's not a hard line. Yeah.
Right. And so, that's where the autism spectrum comes from. And it's also where these more flexible notions of neurodivergence, right, and neurotypical, right, just the idea, autism is one kind of divergence, but there are other types of divergence as well. Even, just having misophonia, that's neurodivergence, right? Things that are kind of typified by, learning in different ways, requiring different learning environments, right? And there are things that likely have again, been true for a really long time. A really basic example of this would be, someone who's like deaf or has, very bad vision or something.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that over time, we've gotten better and better at accommodating folks, after, very, very kind of hard fought battles in the ADA and whatnot. But I think that we're now starting let me maybe rephrase this. My uncle says that we're living in the dark ages of education because not only do we not understand how to educate well, but we don't even understand how to measure education well.
Right. Yeah.
And so we don't even know how to make progress, which I think is really fair. And I think that hopefully that is starting to change. I think with the sort of successes of really diametrically opposed models like Finland and Singapore, we're starting to see, how do we actually make a better education model? And, I'm highly biased. I went to Olin, which is an undergraduate engineering school, 100% project-based.
Mm-hmm.
I believe really, really strongly in self-directed learning. I think models like Montessori education and project-based education and experience-based education, and importantly, competency-based education, and folks that aren't aware of exactly what that is, the idea is rather than working on sort of a consistent, like annual, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right, for kind of one course, it's like, hey, your goal is kind of to get a B in as many things as possible as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Very roughly, right?
I want to, Slater, I want to share with
you.
you. Yes, our daughter goes to a Montessori school.
Really?
Yeah, she does.
Oh, no way.
She does. She's in kindergarten and she's killing it, right? She's so good at so many things so quickly at this like really ripe age where you get it, and she loves it because that's exactly it. The Montessori method, like, hey, come on in. You get a half hour, go grab something from the shelf and do what you want to do with it. And then we're we're huge fans.
And I think this is the thing that people really don't realize. And who knows, like maybe it's not a fit for absolutely every kid.
Yeah.
Maybe there are, several different education methods that make sense. But Olin, and I think because again, people see it sometimes in early childhood education, really rare to see at kind of, like the graduate, or actually, sorry, it's how all graduate education happens. Right. So it's how the very top level happens. But then you don't really see it again in between those two. Yeah. Right. Which is crazy if you think.
It's interesting.
And actually the lecture-based method, right, this is something that is literally thousands and thousands of years old, right? That, is like from these Roman scholars where you'd like come in and like give them a coin at the start of class and you're paying them to talk to you. So it's weird and kind of, I think, outdated in some ways. And I believe that if you give people the ability to direct their own education, give them the tools to do that effectively, at least for a really significant subset of the population, you're going to be really shocked as to how self-motivated people are to really dig deep in education.
Yeah. So awesome. What, at the end of that 5 minutes, what would you want those listening who are interested in this? Like, hey, audience, I want you to go and do X. What's the thing you want us to do?
I want you to push for project-based education in your schools, even if they're not Montessori.
Yeah.
I want you to consider alternative education methods, which might be Montessori schools, which might be homeschooling cooperatives, right? I want you to really think critically about what's out there, because I think if we've learned anything in the past, 20 years as this job market has kind of changed and upheaved, it's that the traditional education model is broken in maybe more ways than one. And there are other options out there today.
That's awesome, Slater. Thank you. This is like I was saying, one of the beautiful. There's so many great parts about doing this podcast. One of them is I learn a lot from my guests. I'm like, I feel really educated. So thank you. And
I'm happy to hear that.
We're going to take a very brief commercial break. We'll be right back after this.
The Talking to Cool People podcast is brought to you by Jason Frizzell Coaching. Jason works with amazing people who are looking to find and develop their passion and purpose and create their journey to wherever it is they want to go. Check us out at jasonfrizzell.com, Facebook, or on Instagram. Jason loves hearing from anyone who thinks it would be cool to connect, to be coached, or to be a guest on our show. Email him at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com or DM him on Facebook and Instagram. And now, back to some more amazing conversation on Talking to Cool People.
All right, Slater, we're back. I'm ready for some more education. And
awesome.
maybe it's I'm feeling a little inferior over here. I feel like at some point I need to teach you something.
No. Yes.
All right, let's do it. Well, but no, not quite yet, because
okay.
I've got another question that I'm sure you got some more stuff for us. So as we're kind of moving to the second half of the show here, like what else is it that you want us to know about you?
So I really care about making Indico, my company, an incredible place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that the older I get, the more that I really start to realize that building, great things requires time and energy. And I'm not, this is not a commercial kind of thing at all. Just to maybe be clear, I'm a weird guy. I think people now mostly believe that I'm a smart, weird guy, right? But people didn't always believe that. And so, I had this kind of very, very deep need, I think, to create a place to work and a way of working that fit.
Yeah.
And fit people that wanted to really care about one another and push each other to be better than they could.
Yeah.
Be, right. Something that I really love about Indico that I think sort of typifies how we think about ourselves and think about work is that I say, I always want any member of the team, right? I don't care if you are an intern that joined last week. I don't care if you are a CRO. If I'm in a meeting, say in front of the whole company, and I say something that's wrong, I want you to feel like you can raise your hand and say, no, Slater, you're full of shit. That was incorrect. And here's why. And really importantly, and this is where I think a lot of people get wrong, because everyone says like, oh yeah, I want people to be honest. I want people to challenge us and whatnot.
Yeah.
But it's not enough to say that. Is that I think we, and thankfully the folks that, I've managed to, got around kind of convinced to join me on this crazy ride, buy into the notion that really it's leadership's job to create an environment where people feel like they can do that.
Yeah.
I think that I'm so happy to have been able to create something like that. And I think that people too often, maybe get caught into this notion that, companies, have to be these absolutely amoral kind of machines. I think people are realizing that there's a different way for companies to be, and there's good arguments for them to be like that.
Yeah, no, there is this is, now we're getting into my sweet spot. This is the stuff that I coach on and talk about myself. I'm really curious. What are the positive results that you've seen from having that? And I'm with you, Slater. Like a lot of like, we have an open door policy, and I'm like, do you really though? Like you have an open door policy as long as you walk in and tell me what I want to hear, and as long as you don't question my authority. So what are for you as one of the leaders at the company? And my assertion would be, you tell me if I'm wrong with this. I guess it's more of an assumption, is that this is the culture that you maintain across the organization. So what are some of the if I was a CEO of a company, I'm like, hey, I'm creating this new thing and I want to create a culture, and I just hired my chief people officer. What is it about this model that makes an impact on not just the employees, but on, I know you're venture backed. So you got some people that are like, hey, we want to get our 10x return. You've got clients, enterprise software clients. I know what those people are like, very demanding. How does it influence all the stakeholders, not just the employees? Because I think most of us understand, hey, that's really cool for the people on the inside the company, but I think it has a really positive effect on customers, financial investors, and also the families of the employees.
Absolutely. So, gosh, there's so much good stuff in there. So let me maybe talk. I'll talk on the investor side first.
Yeah, please.
Because
cool.
We'll say that's maybe the most. I spend some time on the VC side, with our partners, and I'm in EIR at 406 Ventures, so I've got some insight.
Sure.
And what I will say is I'm actually extremely heartened with sort of how venture capital looks at the world. I think there's been this dawning realization. You can kind of just look at software engineer salaries over time and see this in a very obvious way.
Yeah.
People are everything, right? And the ability, and not even just in a static way, right? Because there's the one piece of just, you need a company that can attract and retain the best people in the world. And we've gotten to the point where I don't want to say there's no salary that you can pay that will win someone over, but it's sort of getting to that point, right?
Yeah.
I see especially in the field of AI, right? I see ridiculous salaries, and I see people walking away from ridiculous salaries because, at a certain point, that's just not really going to be what motivates them.
Right.
So I think what investors really care about is retain people, right? Make this a good place to work. You want this to be a destination workplace. You want the absolute best people in the world joining your company, not because you're going to pay them the most money. And maybe you will anyway.
Sure.
Right? Maybe you won't. But even that alone is not going to do it, right? But because you are a place where they can work with great people, where they feel confident that they can do good work, be recognized for that good work, right? It's a very simple list of things, really, that they want.
Yeah.
But it's actually difficult to offer, right? And I think investors are, again, just increasingly, we actually have as one of our most important company stats, we just take our Glassdoor reviews. We're just like, look, people fucking love working here.
That's awesome.
Look, that's why you should invest in us.
That's huge.
And it really resonates.
That's huge. Yeah. I love that. We're talking about my sweet spot in terms of my types of clients I work with too. I work with a lot of clients who work in big tech, startup founders and such, and people work in startups. And it's well known that the salaries are pretty darn good, right? You work at Meta, you work at Amazon, you work at Google, you work at Bitcoin, you work at Indico. You got to pay for top talent. And those salaries will give you a good lifestyle anywhere in the country, including San Francisco, including Boston, including New York. So yeah, I think most of us, we're motivated by money, but at some point you're like, okay, I have an extra $4,000 a month that I'm investing and I'm set for retirement. At some point you need something else, right? And to your point, if you're a good software engineer focused specifically on something like data science or AI, you've got 30 jobs that you could probably go get in a month, right? If you know how to do it.
Totally.
So all you really have left as a founder of a company or the boss is like, hey, this is a really fucking great place to work, like you said. And that's all you got left because, like a $10,000 raise isn't going to move the needle on somebody who's already making $250 to $300.
Right. That's absolutely it.
Yeah.
Right? And, I think that, and we see so many people out there and maybe we can kind of then dovetail around to the families, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what matters most at the end of the day, right? So many people though, maybe not to like any like particular industries, but, particular industries, let's say that are very highly paid where folks in IT aren't treated very well, right? They're, they might make a lot of money.
Yeah.
They're really forced to do these crazy long hours and importantly, not respected. And even more importantly than that, not allowed to do really cutting edge work. Right.
I know those people. I used to sell to those people.
Yeah. There you go. Right. Exactly. I think everyone knows who I'm talking about and I don't have to say exactly who it is, right? And those people will go and take, 50% pay cuts to go work at a place that they actually love. But that's the key. Love. Right. Because when you look at that person and they're out in the market, right, they're going to see whatever 50 companies and like, you've got to pay them enough, to be in the running. Right. But then when they've got 10 offers on the table, it's going to be the people they want to work with. Yeah. It's going to be the company that they feel like is going to respect them and let them run. And, I think the very best way to enforce that, maybe to come back around to some of the other pieces and how this affects the leaders is this notion of servant leadership.
Yep.
Right. I think of it really is, look, you're joining our company. I'm making a pitch to you. What are you going to get? What am I going to do for you? Because at the end of the day, right, it is my job to make sure that you can work as effectively as possible, and so on down the line through the organization. Yeah. Right.
That's awesome, Slater. All right. I'm going to see if I can educate you and the audience a little bit. We'll see. I don't know. I feel like I have some real, I'm going to own, I've got some imposter syndrome over here. Well,
we all do.
Well, right? We all do. Yeah. But we'll see. So now you're going to play podcast host for a minute here, Slater.
Okay.
And I'm going to answer something that you want to ask me.
So here's a question.
Yeah.
How do you, maybe a little meta, how do you make a compelling podcast?
Whew. Well, so the context of your question implies that I know how to make a compelling podcast.
I mean, I'll jump to that assertion. At least the people listening. The people listening,
also, thousands of downloads. But
for our audience, I think that's or tell me how you think about that question.
Yeah, no, totally. Well, I was laughing because I'm like, oh, the context implies that I know how to make a compelling podcast, so which by implies, yes. I can tell you what I can answer is how I believe you can create a compelling long form or short form interview podcast, because that's what I do. Mm-hmm. And let's assume that for those who are here with us, that this is a place that they believe this is happening. I don't think they'd be here if they weren't. But if you are here and you don't like this, then I would question what else you do with your time. So
yeah, stop listening. We're 30 minutes in at this point.
They're waiting for some more food stuff from you, Slater. Like what else? What other things can I learn? So for me, the thing, and this kind of relates back to like coaching and servant leadership again, like a lot of coaches as leaders as coaches and what I try to do here is I try to ask the questions that I literally don't know the answer to. So then that just keeps the conversation flowing in a very natural way. And so it's interesting, and you know this. You do podcasts. Some podcasts are like, well, what questions can I ask you? And so in my mind as a podcast host, like, I know what I'm going to ask you, but I have no idea what the answers are, versus like, let me ask you a question that's a canned answer, which for certain styles is really good. I think for this style, it's like being open to the conversation going in any various direction. And also what makes for a compelling podcast, in my opinion, for this style is all sorts of amazing types of guests. So to give you an example, I've got you on, you know, you're a technology guy, engineer, you know, a lot of stuff. My podcast that came out last week, and I'm interviewing you here early January. This will come out here in the next month or so, or late January, early February. My first guest was my wife. So that's it. 101st episode. I interviewed my wife. My second episode of this new season 3, is a male stripper, former male stripper.
Very cool.
So it's like, for me, what's compelling to me is the wide range of people you get. So I've shared this on the podcast a few times, but really my podcasting hero is armchair expert, Dak Shepard, because for 2 reasons. One, he interviews all sorts of fascinating people, right? He'll have Adam Grant on and Barack Obama. And I just saw this week he had Jeremy Renner on, and he had Eric Schmidt, founder of Google, on last week. Oh. So it's like, hey, everybody's interesting. And the other thing that I love about that style, and you are a perfect example of this, Dax believes that arguably the least important, interesting thing about somebody is what they do for a living. And I actually believe that too. I mean, you know, I could have been like, so tell me what it's like to be a CTO and found a company. That's a great conversation. But man, like mushrooms, rock climbing, MMA, like I find all that other stuff interesting. So for me, what's compelling is getting to know people on a real personal basis for my style. But that's what I'm curious about. And I have enough listeners that I know there's other people who like that style. Some people are like, I only want podcasts that I'm going to learn something, I can take it into my job. Great. This probably isn't the podcast for you. But if you're curious about humanity, this is kind of the perfect thing. So for me, that's what I believe makes a compelling podcast. The second thing I'll offer is interviewers that show up with curiosity, and also like it's all about the guest at the end of the day, which I'm not perfect at. This is a good example. This is kind of like my little part of the show. But when they get, it's like all about Slater. It's all about my wife. It's all about Corey, who's the episode tomorrow. That just makes for a fun conversation, because like they know that I'm going to be the anchor of the show, and then I'm going to bring what I do to these people and have a conversation. But it's really going to be about the new information and sharing and relationship building and all those things. So that's for me what makes for a compelling podcast. Yeah. Cool
super
question.
Interesting. Oh, that's super cool.
Thanks, man.
No, thanks. I mean, I think it's really cool. You know, I've been in a few of them at this point. I find them to be like a lot of fun, but I also, you know, I've been writing, and, you know, I think that question of, you know, like what makes content engaging, I think it's an interesting one to talk about.
Yeah, that's a cool, yeah. And I'm sure you're going to go on podcast that you're talking about data science and artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Oh, I do that all the time.
And actually, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like there's if those are things you're passionate about, you want to hear Slater talking about those. Those are not things that I like them, but for me, it's like I'm more interested in Slater as a human, right? Like that, but that's just the way I roll.
It's very interesting. No, it's super interesting, because I think the way that I think about it, right, is I don't think I could be a CTO, right? I don't think I could have the thoughts and like make the connections that are required of me as you know, this founder and entrepreneur and CTO, right? If I didn't do the rest of this,
yeah, you
know, if I didn't know how to like grit it out, you know, in the third inning when, you know, like I've got a swollen eye. Right. Yeah. Like, you know, then, you know, this kind of like seems, I don't want to say easy, because it's very, very hard, but, you know, it gives me some context. It gives me some skills.
Yeah. Really awesome.
Something that I actually often say is I think the most useful skill for being an entrepreneur is theater. So, you know, I did a lot of plays.
Yeah, man. Oh, we could spend an hour on this.
Oh yeah.
Oh man. I would, this is a high recommendation. I think you'll agree. For anybody who's in leadership, who's like a people leader, and anybody who does like coaching work, consulting work, go take an improv class. It's a game changer. Because one, you realize that none of this stuff is really that important. Two, you're going to make an ass of yourself, but you're not actually making an ass of yourself because it's real. And the ability to flex in the moment And I don't know if you've ever taken any improv class. I've done some acting, done some improv.
Yes.
You know, like
In fact,
how do we raise the stakes? How do I partner with Slater in this? That's the other thing too. What makes a great podcast is nobody wants to hear you and I arguing about anything on a podcast. Like nobody. It's like an improv. One of the well, maybe.
Well, no's right. I think there can be interesting arguments.
I think,
but they're yes arguments,
right? But
they're yes and arguments.
Yeah, but like one of the basic tenets of improv is you don't fight on stage. Nobody really wants to. It's boring. You're like, hey, we're standing on the moon right now and we're drinking beers. I'm like, actually, you're not. We're standing on Mars and you're drinking wine. Like that's not interesting. That's boring.
Yeah, you want to know the most interesting thing I ever heard?
Please.
Or sorry, not the most interesting thing I ever heard. But something interesting about public speaking. What profession do you have to be a good public speaker for? Like, what's the one profession across all professions where every person who does that is a good public speaker?
Yeah. Oh, man. I can think of so many places that you should be, but they're not.
Right. That's the thing. Right. There's so many like that.
I would say like some sort of media, television anchor, radio announcer.
I think really, really close. You got very much the right idea, but there's I think more and less charismatic, anchors.
Sure.
I think there's
right.
And I think that's a should and probably quite a high rate.
Yeah.
The answer is stand-up comedian.
Yeah, for sure. You have to be.
You cannot tell a joke without perfect timing and stage presence. It just doesn't matter. You just can't do it.
So good. Man, that's so true. And you have to be able to do it in the moment, right? Because I was thinking like an actor and actress, but you can do 100 takes and be like, oh, that's the one. A stand-up comedian.
Right.
This is another thing we haven't. I love comedy. Like I watch Dave Chappelle and I'm just like, that dude's timing is it's just perfect.
Yeah, so I actually did a stand-up comedy class when I was, I don't know, like 14 or something. I went up at the comedy shop. And I mean, it was amazing. Like, I mean, I think that almost like all entrepreneurs should like go, and that's why I love the improv example. I think improv is perfect. I think, look, take it a step further. Take a stand-up comedy class. You will be shocked by how much better you present out.
Amazing. Yeah, and you also know that not everybody's going to like all your stuff, and that's actually okay.
Right, and it's actually sort of this whole ability to kind of read an audience and feel the energy and feed off it. And, no matter how tightly you script your jokes, right, something always is different the night of.
Yeah,
right?
That's so good. I'm a huge stand-up comedy person. I pre-COVID used to go to like the Comedy Cellar in the city. I don't know if you've ever been to the Comedy Cellar in the Village.
No.
It's one of the best comedy clubs in New York City. I love stand-up comedy.
Very cool.
So good.
Have you ever seen this is like a little random, but have you ever seen Taskmaster?
No, what's that?
It's a British show, but basically it's a it's a group of comedians. It's a game show where they have a group of comedians come on every season, and then they do these just ridiculous tasks against each other. So
That's
it's just
amazing.
Like, them. It's so good. It's like, and the stuff is like, here is a pineapple. Hide this pineapple on your body. You have 30 minutes. Go.
That sounds so fun.
It's like, yeah, and it's like all these comedians who are doing it.
Check it out.
I don't know. It's so good. It's all on.
I'm going to say it right here, live on the show, live for you and I at least. This is going in the show notes. A link to Taskmaster.
Yes, Taskmaster.
Thanks, Slater. Thank you for the really awesome question.
Do you know Noel from Great British Bake Off?
No, my wife would though, because I know she watches that show.
Okay, all right. He's also from the Grand Bouche, but he's on a season.
I'd see again. I feel like I'm overwhelmed with the new things I need to look into now because of you.
Well, great. Hopefully you'll digest this in time for the next conversation.
Exactly. Well, thank you for the question. That was a really good one. Nobody's ever asked me that before. People have asked me why'd you start the podcast, what do you like about it, but nobody's ever asked me that. And again, full disclosure, it's just my opinion. There's a lot of amazing podcasts with a lot of different formats. This is not the only way to do it. It's just the way I choose to do it.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. Thanks, man. All right, Slater. You've answered this about 10 times, but I'm going to ask you again because I know we're going to get a different answer. What are you passionate about?
Oh gosh, there is a lot there, but I think that the one that I'm going to have to jump to here, the one that I held my back from the last time, right? Because this isn't something that I think people can necessarily take action on right now, but I think it's something that's really important to people. And this is machine learning and AI. Obviously, there's a reason that I've committed my life to that because I think there's some important things there. I am really passionate about people thinking of AI with the right analogy. I think that one of the biggest problems that we have today, and it is a somewhat specific gripe I have with terms unsupervised and self-supervised learning. But it's this idea that an AI is sort of this objective, autonomous thing that you like teach something and then it does its own thing, right? And it has kind of independent ideas and thoughts and conceptions.
Like Skynet, for example, probably the worst example.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, yeah, that's what people have in their head, right? It's Skynet, it's it's AI, it's Blade Runner, it's that kind of a thing, and it's reasonable, right? But I wrote a blog post is remember that in every single one of those AI movies, the point is that the AI is actually human. It's funny. Yeah. Every single movie has the same moral, right? Yeah. The AI is human, right? Yeah. So that AI is actually not AI. It's just like a cool way of exploring humanity.
Yeah.
AI, at least the AI of today, right? Maybe this will be different in 20 years, right? But it's much better to think of it as, a mirror or a parrot and a bionic arm, right? And these are the analogies that I really, really like. So think of it like these things are being programmed with data. There are many different ways of doing that. That's the different ways of supervising. But no matter whether you're labeling it or not, right? You're programming these algorithms with data, right?
Yeah.
Like a human did this, and they are then reflecting that back at you. But it's a mirror, but it's not a perfect mirror. And just like a parrot, isn't going to perfectly reflect everything back. It's this mirror has a bunch of like divots and like holes, and it's going to ignore some stuff and it's going to focus some other stuff, right? And you can control for all of that. If you know where to look and you're like, oh, well, I really want to make sure this gets across. But most parts of the image, not really going to pay too much attention to.
Right.
It's close enough, right? So it's actually a very good analogy for how AI works. And then the second piece, in terms of how we should be adopting it, how we should be thinking about it. I think that, again, the common analogy of like, there's this android that's going to come in, sit next to me, I think is not very helpful. I think that the much better notion is a bionic arm. Even though that's like a little bit more sci-fi than I often like to get with my AI. Back when chess was still a hard problem for computers, there was this notion of a centaur as well, right? But it's that idea of human-computer partnership, right, as the primary goal. The reason I think that is really key, and why, in fact, I think that is the direction everyone should be pursuing instead of now where it's sort of like a fringe kind of area of the space. Yeah. We have billions of humans. My personal belief is while human intelligence is amazing, it's not our limiting factor right now. And I think it's much more interesting, instead of thinking, how can I spend $1 billion to replicate a single human in silicon, right? How can I make an actual practical system that helps a human do the thing they were doing anyway, 100 times better, 100 times faster?
Yeah.
And that's where the notion of the bionic arm comes in. Yeah. So I just think I think it's really, really important, especially as AI starts to kind of sink into your lives, right? If someone's like, oh, that's like uncontrollable, it's the algorithm's like, no, that's like bullshit. Like, don't accept that.
It's not HAL 3000 or where from
no.
Yeah. Like
it's code and they can fix
it. Exactly. That's awesome, Slater. What's the thing that you're most proud of?
This is going to be like an extremely cheesy answer, but it's the thing that came to mind, and that's my marriage. So
cheesy. I can't believe you'd say something like that. That the love of your life is the most important, is the thing you're most proud of. Wow, cheesy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like Indico is awesome. Don't get me wrong. But I'm going to be with her longer than I'm with Indico.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, this question is interesting because for people that are married with no kids, it's my spouse, if they're happily married, which we don't get into on the show. This is not what this is for. We could, although we could have some fighting couples back on here. That could be interesting. Maybe
that could be fun.
Yeah. If people have children, it's always children. If people don't have either of those two things, then it's like something they did for work. It's like 99.9% probability. So
okay, well, all right, then
I'm normalizing this answer for you.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, then I feel very confident in that answer. Yeah, no, I think we've done a good job, and yeah, it's not easy to do a good job at.
No. How long you two been married for?
We've only been married for maybe like a year and a half.
Okay,
but we've been together for 10 years.
Oh, you've been married a lot longer. You've been officially married for a year and a half. Unofficially married.
Yes.
Very cool.
Exactly. And the pandemic obviously complicated everything as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, we still haven't had like an actual wedding, if you will. We had, but we've got something on YouTube, and that's
You're like something on YouTube, and also we're gonna have the AI create something for us at some point. It's an AI created
it'll
way
make something beautiful. Yeah,
that's awesome. What I call this my little therapy question. People that listen to the show know what's coming next. You don't. It's perfect.
No.
So Slater, what's something that you're afraid that might actually be true about you?
Oh, about me.
Yeah, about you specifically.
So, and it's something that I'm afraid, not something that I kind of recognize as true but unfortunate.
However you'd like to answer, my friend.
All right, no, that's fair. So I think something that I'm realizing increasingly about myself, right? And I think that maybe at a time this would have scared me, but I don't think I'm scared of it anymore. I think that I'm maybe about at the point in my life where I'm not going to fight it anymore, and I'm instead going to start working around it. And that's like, I'm an inherently kind of disorganized, very like feast and famine kind of worker, right? Like I think there's other folks that, they're like, oh, middle school and high school, like it gets harder and harder. And like at some point, and college gets harder still. At some point, you're not going to be able to do it the night before. And for me, that whole experience went very different, right? Like I never had to like do time management. I just got good at doing a lot of work the night before.
You're a deep worker. You're like a deep work kind of guy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I remember I had this summer school where we had to like go through a whole book and like write these things or whatever. I basically did nothing the whole year, and I like did all the math out. And I'm like, all right, if I work nonstop for like the 18 hours before class, I will get everything done.
Yeah.
And then that's exactly what I did. I think that there's times when that can go too far and become destructive.
Sure.
There was a period of 2 weeks once where I worked 120 hours a week for each week. And that was really bad.
Yeah, that doesn't sound ideal.
Yeah, you're not sleeping 8 hours a night. You don't have time.
No.
I was sleeping in sort of 2-hour chunks with like a around the world kind of, 24/7 clock cycle. It was terrible. I burnt out really, really hard.
Can imagine.
Yeah. So I think that getting over the fear of like, how can I work better? How can I be more dedicated? How can I only do like, just work hours every day? Yeah. I'm like, no, like I'm not going to do that. Some days I'm just going to have to work for 20 hours straight because I get hit, and I'm leaning into that.
Man, can I offer you an opinion on this around this topic? I'm fascinated by this topic. So the whole idea that like you can't procrastinate, it's bad, that if you are somebody who works in this way, that there's something inherently, I'd be like, oh, it's wrong. I mean, you can go to the store, right, and buy 100 books on procrastination or how to avoid it, how to do time management. And this is something that's interesting because I work with really, I would say like high executive functioning type people who generally have a pretty good idea of themselves. And they're always looking for like the next thing. And I'm going to relate this to another topic, and I'll bring it back to procrastination. It's kind of like the idea of like the 5 a.m. club. Like, this is the way you're going to get ahead, is the 5 a.m. club. And I'm like, not everybody's biological cycle works that way. And so like this whole like the hustle, I get up at 4:30 to do this. Like, that's perfect for some people, right? Other people, that is the worst idea because their brain isn't ready, their body isn't ready. So
actually, I got to share just a quick thing on that.
Yeah.
So for high school, because I had to go to a very special school and it is very difficult to get around LA, I had to wake up at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
Every day. 4 years. And I am a night owl.
Yeah.
It was absolutely terrible for my body in every single way. And the second I did it, right, as soon as I stopped like going to high school and realizing, I was getting through on one leg in crutches, basically, mentally.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah.
And thankfully, you're never forced to do that any other time than, like K through 12 education.
Right. Because then when you're in college, you're like, I'm not taking that 8 a.m. class. I'm taking the noon class or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel bad. They forced us to have a 9 a.m. lecture for one of the core classes. Not only did I ditch every single class, I convinced the whole class to ditch every single class.
Oh, you were that guy.
To the point where I was completely unintentional. I felt like so bad. I just heard it's like only 5 people showed up to class, and the whole class is supposed to be here.
Yeah.
There's like a whole lecture hall with 5 kids.
Your professor's like, Mr. Victoroff, please come to my office.
He did. He was relatively good natured about it. He wouldn't, but like at that point, he's like, guys, like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So he just gave them all extra credit.
Yeah. So back to the kind of the deep work, how you know to work thing. There's one of the things that I'll take a look at when people is like, call it the overwhelm cycle. And we look at like, what's the thing that moves you into overwhelm, and then what do you do? And I really think that some people need to be overwhelmed before they do their best work. Like their brain I think, and you probably know more about this than I do. I'm not much of a scientist, but I think there's like some dopamine stuff going on. They're like, oh my gosh, I got a deadline. I got 18 hours. I got to get it done. And it's like a rush. And some people, they just don't work well until they have that hard done. They actually have the pressure when they do their best work.
Yeah, it's and while that describes me absolutely perfectly, I think explaining it is pretty difficult.
It can be.
I think a big part of it. So sorry, there's 2 big pieces of it. I think one, I've realized rest is a part of the process. I think a second big piece is that I've realized that the time leading up to whatever that 18-hour sprint, it's not passive time. It's very much not passive time. What I'm doing is I'm thinking about it, and then I'm putting it down. I'm thinking about it, and then I'm putting it down. And what I'm really doing is kind of unconsciously coming up with this plan of attack so that when the 11th hour strikes, I know exactly what I'm going to do for every minute of that 11th hour.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what's happening, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, there's a rush for sure, right? Like, I'm not going to say that doesn't happen, right? But it's sort of like a fight in that everything slows down, right? It's sort of like that fight or flight, almost like really deep intensity. I actually trained myself to work really productively with a particular song. And I can't listen to that song anymore because it almost sends me into a panic. I need to just start coding impulsively. So yeah, I don't know. It's some maybe connection of like that fight or flight response and that surge of adrenaline and just like satisfying it through this work.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's immensely satisfying to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think I love this answer because it's like the thing that you're afraid, and it sounds like it's something about you that you're just owning as your process instead of making it wrong, which I think the world and going back to the education system makes us wrong about a lot of the ways that a lot of us naturally are. It makes you wrong. Oh, you should do your homework you should do it early, and you should do it this way. And that's just like, it's just like all animals. It's like if you have a dog, like not all dogs are the same. Some dogs like stay up late. Some dogs pass out early. Like we're mammals. Like we have different cycles.
Just like one anecdote.
Yeah.
I had a math class, and this teacher because I think there's 2 ways of teaching math. One cares about math, and one cares about process. I remember I had these folks that would tell me, Slater's very smart, but if he doesn't learn how to show his work, he's never going to advance beyond 3rd grade math. I definitely know more math than they do at this point.
Yes,
yes.
Yeah. You're like, hi, I'm the CTO of a venture-backed company. So
yeah, I know maybe a thing or 2
computer
about
science. Yeah.
Right. But the thing that really drove me crazy in this math class, she was very much a process-oriented person. And so there was an extra credit question that was, very, challenging. That was, find the volume of a torus, in this particular like coordinate system. It was like high school. And I found an extremely simple, elegant proof that was like 2 lines, and I wrote it down, and I got the right answer. Not a single other person in any of the classes got the question right. So I'm feeling pretty good. She looks at it and she says, no. The way that I wanted you to do it required like 18 lines of complicated algebra, so this doesn't count. So I'm not giving you the credit. Just like, that's the worst.
No, that's the worst. Also,
Yeah,
and as a computer science guy, that's so perfect. So you're like, we want as little code as possible to do this thing. We don't want 18 lines because at some point, as we refine our process, we're going back and stripping out some of those lines of code and rewriting them. That's so good.
Yeah.
That's such a great analogy.
Yeah. And like I had a problem with the math competitions back in the day because it's like, you get 6 problems and they're like, all right, we want 6 proofs. And what I would always do is I would spend all of my time coming up with beautiful, simple proofs for 2 of the problems. Right. And they were gorgeous proofs, but for 2 of the problems.
For 2 of the problems, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You were a math rebel. I'll call you a math rebel.
I love that. I will take
You're a math
that,
rebel.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Slater, we're gonna wrap it up for today.
Yeah.
I do have a couple more questions for you if you got a few more minutes for us.
I do have a few more.
How do you see the world?
Spaceship Earth. That's the most accurate, just because the way you asked the question, Spaceship Earth. We've got a lot of problems, and we've got a lot of shit to get done, and quite frankly, I don't know if we can get it all done, and I don't even quite feel like we're all trying yet.
Yeah.
Thankfully, a lot of people are trying, and we are making progress, but, sitting where I sit, it's a lot. And I don't feel immediately comfortable that we're going to those grand challenges that they put forth. I don't know if we're going to figure them out. Maybe not the way things are going right now.
Yeah. So if I was going to bottom line that, it sounds like you see the world as a place to be hopeful about, but also with humanity currently the way it is, the hope wanes pretty quickly.
I think we can accomplish amazing things, but let's not forget that we've got to put the work in to do that. Right.
So it's like you're hopeful, but this doesn't come for free. Like time, energy, money, resources. Awesome. I love that. So as we wrap up here, how can people connect with you on a personal level? How can people learn more about the company? And I'd love to hear, this is for my own curiosity. Tell us a little bit about who are the kind of people that your company works with. Like, who's going to want to know more about the company?
Yeah. So, myself personally, you can ask me questions on Quora. You can reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Those are all good spots. Or I've got a blog, slater.website, where you can, drop me a message. Learn more about Indico, indico.io or indicodata.ai. Both get you to the same place. And in terms of, who really our product is for, right? This is for people at banking, financial services places, people that are in automation centers of excellence, that are really working with unstructured data, right? So, trying to automate document processes, things like that. Very, very classic. Commercial real estate as well as big.
Awesome. So if somebody's listening, and they're like, hey, that sounds like something we could use. Hit you up directly. Go to the website and book a call. Like, what's the best way for people to connect?
You can do both. Yeah. I will say probably going through the website and talking to them. Like, we've got a very conscientious team, and they'll respond, and frankly, they'll probably take better care of you than me. But if you just want to, chat, right, and kind of get coffee, right, or talk about it at a strategic level,
awesome.
That's what you should reach out to me.
Awesome. Thanks, Slater. All right, so we're going to wrap it up, and I have a lovely tradition on the show. I can't wait to hear what you have for us. All of my guests leave us with words to wisdom, and they're going to be short and sweet words to wisdom. I had a guest one time is like, yeah, let me give you something short and sweet. And they gave like a monologue. I'm like, that's not short and sweet, my man. Like, Post-it note, Instagram post. What do you got for us?
In a long journey, moving forward is infinitely faster than not moving, no matter how slowly you move.
Now that is some perfect length, beautiful words to wisdom. Thank you much. Thank you so much for being on today, Slater. It's a pleasure to get to know you. Good luck to you, to your investors, to your customers, to the rest of the Indico team. I'm excited to hear more about what you all do. And stay warm here in early January 2022. Keep digging those mushrooms. I was sharing this with Slater before. The movie Pig is a great movie. It's actually not what you expect. It's Nicolas Cage, and it looks like he's a serial killer, but he's not. And it's about a foraging pig. He owns a foraging pig. It's really good. So enjoy that movie. And we'll be talking soon, Slater. Thank you again so much.
Awesome. Total pleasure. And don't forget Fantastic Fungi. Second mushroom-themed movie.
Fungi. We'll put all this in the show notes. People are like, this is the first time we put a mushroom-based link in the show notes.
First of many.
First of many. This is it. Every guest from now on is going to be like, I heard your interview with Slater. I want to talk about food now, too.
Yeah, no, I think mushrooms are being a real pandemic trend.
They're a pandemic trend. All right. Thanks so much, Slater. Yeah. Awesome. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Talking to Cool People with Jason Frizzell. If you enjoyed today's episode, please tell your friends. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and give us a shout out, or take a moment to leave a review on iTunes. If something from today's episode piqued your interest and you'd like to connect, email us at podcast@jasonfrizzell.com. We love hearing from our listeners because you're cool people too.